And welcome back to the Black Psychologist Podcast. We appreciate everybody being here and listening. You could be anywhere in the world, but you're here listening and watching us. So we're grateful for that. So thank you for everybody being back. I am one half of your humble and gracious host and clinician here for your listening pleasures, Dr. Kyle Osborne. And of course, I'm never, ever here by myself. I'm here with the one and only. He's the king of health. There is none higher. Sucker MC should call him sire. To burn his kingdom, you must use fire. He won't stop rocking till he retires. Dr. Jason Coleman, how are you, good
What's up?
sir?
What's up, man?
Nothing,
I'm
man. How?
good, bro. I'm good, man.
Yeah,
Another week in the books. It was a hot one this week out here in Jersey and Philly. But we good. We still here nonetheless. So I'm not complaining. Blessed.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah,
You know,
we
of
we
course,
uh.
of course, we want to thank everybody for listening, tuning in, subscribing. Always humbled by the support every week. And we just want to thank everybody for listening. Encourage everybody to share, subscribe. Please tell a friend. And just thankful. So that's really about it, bro.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely keep the comments coming. You know, as you see, Dr. J and I we're very interactive and we like engaging with our listeners and our watchers. So definitely continue to send your comments and your ideas. And absolutely, like we've talked about and how we've posted on our various platforms, is that we want you guys to be engaged in the conversation. So we have our email up and running, the Black Psychologist. Podcast at gmail.com. So, send us the video just about any questions, any statements, and things that you guys want to talk about, any topics. We want you guys to be as involved as much as possible. So, and, we'll bring the video up on the episode. So, you can get famous, see yourself on the pod, you know? So,
Yeah,
but yeah,
I
absolutely.
don't know about famous, but you can
Hey,
get on the
man.
podcast. I don't know about famous.
But definitely I echo everything that Dr. J just said. All right, so without further ado, let's get into it. So the first topic of the agenda is we're throwing it back. We're going to do a little bit of a history lesson. So in
Right.
1870 in Fairfax or Richmond, Virginia, they opened up the very first mental hospital exclusively for black patients. All right, you want to hear what the title is? What the name of the hospital is, Jay? It was called the Central Lunatic Asylum for the Colored Insane. All right. And it was
Let that sink in for a second. Let
yeah,
that sink in.
let that sink in. One more time. Central Lunatic Asylum for Colored Insane. Okay? Yeah. It was formerly a Confederate facility and until the Commonwealth took over. So yeah, it was I was taken aback by the name. Just as when I read it, I had to read it a couple of times myself. Because it
What?
has pretty much every inappropriate word when we're talking about
Right.
mental health in it, so yeah, this was
I
something.
mean,
Give me your thoughts about it as you read through that article.
I mean, obviously, it's important for us to consider. It was opened in June 1870. So, in terms of the context, in terms of the time, Central Lunatic Asylum for the colored insane, right? So we got to understand this is the antebellum South. Um, what I found this article is very interesting, right? Because it connects a lot of things that are going on now and then, right?
Mhm.
Um, a lot of the, let's say, apprehension that individuals of color have when it comes around the mental health system, right? This is an important piece of history because it begins here. It really begins before this, right? But this is a one of the first places where this is documented, right? So we have the antebellum South, and we have pseudoscience that's going around and commonly accepted that we're talking about individuals who have just been through slavery, right?
Right.
Blacks were immune from mental illness because they lack the stress of property ownership, right? So individuals who've been through generations of slavery, what was commonly accepted from experts in the field is that we essentially were immune from mental illness because we lack the stress of property ownership, right? So what's so ironic, obviously, is that African Americans were treated as property, right? And all of the things that we went through in terms of being breeding, right? Having our children ripped away from us, right? Having families, exterminated. The common belief was that we were immune from mental illness because we lacked the stress of property ownership. So when you look at individuals now, and they lack the confidence in the mental health system, medical system, those things, this is where it started, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I was very intrigued by this article because I thought it was interesting. I had never really heard of this, but it's one of those things where you have your moments reading through, But what did you think about it?
So initially, I was shocked, right? I didn't totally believe it, and like you said, it's like a journey as you read through the article, for the reason that of those that you just mentioned, like slaves were deemed as property, so they can't.
Right,
If they're property, then that means that they can't have stress. They don't have emotions. They don't have any of these
right,
other different feelings or any other type of things. So my initial thought was, well, why would they even be providing care or providing a hospital specifically for black individuals or former slaves if they're property, right? So for me, I thought that was kind of
right,
a contradiction. I didn't understand the thought process with that. And then as I continued to read through it, then it was like, oh well, a lot of them, were there for physical labor, right? So the black people, they were admitted based off of the word of like former employees or former employers and other white people, rather than say, they were brought in by like a family member or from the community. Like if they were observed being in some form of distress or having an episode, then they were brought into the hospital. No, they were
right,
brought in and they were expected to engage in physical labor. So
right,
so it started to make sense that, okay, so it wasn't, the goal wasn't entirely to get these individuals help because they were dealing or experiencing some distress. They were going to be putting these patients and these people back to work.
right.
So it started to make, a lot more sense as far as, okay, I see, some of the other, the alternative motive involved with this situation, which also, like you said, it connects the dots, because already if you're advertising, hey, we're gonna, come in, we're gonna treat you for whatever condition, and then we're gonna put you to work again. That's the, connecting the dots of the historical mistrust of, you know black individuals in the health system. So, absolutely, you started to learn more, and it became more and more interesting as you read on.
I mean, and remember, right? This is 1870, right? So not only were half the patients that were there, well, no, not only were the patients there, large majority of them admitted through like the words of employers, Confederates, those type of things. They said
Mhm.
half the patients that were there due to homelessness, joblessness, dislocation, or medical issues, right? So this was not necessarily a mental health facility. This was a place for quote unquote people who couldn't survive or didn't have the skills to survive on their own, right? Or
Right.
indentured servitude, wherever you want to bring it, right? At this part. So these were this was a place to put individuals who could not necessarily support themselves or survive on their own, right? And they were still getting physical labor out of them. And what I thought was ironic was how they drew the comparison between a facility like this, where you have half of the people in there who are in there for non-mental health related reasons, and our some of our behavioral health facilities in our jails now, right? Um, and if you go in there and you've had a day worth of training in mental health, you'll realize that over half the patients there don't have necessarily mental health issues. They're issues that are grounded in other ways that are impacting their life. So I just thought you know, it was definitely sad, but it's an important piece, right? Because when we go from there to now, right? And I'm not drawing a direct correlation, but when we talk about why you have some individuals who are so hesitant to take a COVID-19 vaccine, this is part of the reason why,
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
Because all the way back then, right, you have the individuals who are the professionals who are in charge, right, who were pushing these lies in this pseudoscience, right? And we're talking about ex-slaves. We're talking about multi-generational trauma, right? The individuals who would probably be the most worthy of therapeutic services, and immediately after they're quote unquote free, they're victims in another capacity, right? So I thought it was just interesting how, you can kind of draw that line. But I do think it's important that the history is preserved, right? Because, um, you know, before people call us emotional or call us uninformed, it's important that we have this history so, we can show people, why some individuals or certain groups, aren't as trustful of these systems.
And in addition to that, there's also the aspect of thinking, okay, well, where do we go from here? Because I'm totally going to say there's a strong correlation between what was going on then and very similar to what's happening now. Not only for the
Right.
deception of services that you're pretending to offer black individuals, but even to the point where, like you mentioned, half of the patients that were there weren't coming in there for medical reasons. It weren't, at least it weren't
Right.
coming in for their medical, for their mental health, which is the same now. A lot of patients, if you come into any city area inpatient facility, whether it be Friends, it would be Fairmount, whether it be, Episcopal, whether it be, all these other different inner city inpatient facilities, a decent or half of the population are there for housing. Unfortunately, right? They're there because they're homeless. They're there because they don't have any place to go. You definitely see the surplus of admissions in all of these hospitals, especially when it gets cold outside, right? They have these cold blues. They have all these different things. So it's now looking at, okay, well, what has changed? Right? Just looking
Right.
at the mental health system, as far as you're looking at inpatient or psychiatric units, what's changed? That the same thing that was going on there is happening now. What are we doing to improve? What are we doing to properly assess patients? And not to say that, oh, well, if they don't have an issue, they don't deserve housing or anything. But it's like, okay, this is an even bigger problem that stems from all the way back from 1870. So,
And
it's thinking about, okay, what has changed and what haven't we done? Or what are the missteps that are continuing to happen?
and I mean, I think that's important, right? Because you start hearing people have these conversations nowadays about like reparations and all of these things, right? And all of them are kind of done under the umbrella of like, what do people of color need, right? People have been asking that question for a very long time. Like, what do people need? Is it money? Is it school? Is it? And my answer to individuals have always been, it's a complicated and multi-layered question, right?
Mhm.
Because you're going to need a multifaceted approach. And why do I bring that up in the midst of this discussion, right? Because we're talking about institutions and structural racism, right? That's pervasive through medical institution, law institution, criminal justice, education, housing, and mental health, right? This is an example of it. That's why I said it's so important, right? Because we see it popping up in so many places. Whether it's Donald Trump in the 80s getting sued for housing discrimination, whether it's all of these things that we're about to talk about in the next article in terms of discrimination against people of color in the medical institutions. We know what's going on in the schools. We can take that back to Brown versus Board of Education, and Kenneth and Mamie Clark, my heroes in terms of the Black Dog experiment.
Mhm.
So this is the reason why people of color are distrustful of these systems, right? But we have to have this information when people call us emotional, right? We have to have this information. So I just think that it's important that we draw these distinctions because, again, when we're talking about multi-generational trauma and we're talking about structural racism, it impacts all of these systems.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to connect the dots from the historical disregard surrounding black mental health, because that's what it is, right? It's a situation where thinking, okay, this is how they used to minimize and completely disregard, right? You were looked at as property, and it was to even to the extent where if slaves tried to escape, that was deemed as a mental illness, right?
Right.
Drapetomania was an actual term or diagnosis that they used for someone, trying to escape slavery, but they're also
Right.
deemed as property. And so,
Somebody who had the nerve to want to wander. and want their freedom, not want to be bound, right? And again, when we talk about distrust of the system, we had American physicians, licensed physicians pushing this, right? And as we will visit in the next article, right? Individuals of color of specifically do not trust people in these systems, whether you have a white coat or not, with their health, and in a lot of cases, they're correct.
Yeah, they are. So, you have to understand the history in order for us to be like, okay, what has changed, what hasn't changed. And unfortunately, even us being unbiased and working in the field, not a lot has changed. Right. And like you
Right.
said, it's a multifaceted situation, and a lot of different things are going to need to be addressed on various different levels. So, but this was, especially being an inpatient guy myself, I really enjoyed, reading this article, because I was blown away. Like, I was totally shocked that but of course, unfortunately, when it looks like it's like, okay, this is really good, it's something different entirely. So it just makes me, honestly, prompts me to want to look and do other research and see, um, what other type of facilities and other different historical facts were taking place right this time. Because if this happened in Virginia, this wasn't the only place where this was taking place at. So,
No, you're
definitely
right,
gonna,
man.
so
I
definitely gonna keep
mean,
my
the
eyes
the
open for
good
more of
thing
these.
the good thing about this place is that I think they were saying there was over 800,000 records that were preserved.
Right. Yeah.
So, and I think this place is on the map, so they're kind of preserving this as, like, obviously not a positive moment in history, but something that we can look back on and learn from in terms of not only culturally competent care, but in terms of being more considerate of why minorities in particular are skeptical of us as mental health professionals and the system in general.
Absolutely. So, something to continue to be on the lookout for. All right. So, moving along to our next topic, back into the sports realm. So the NFL recently promised an end to race norming. What's race norming? All right. So race norming is a controversial practice that curbs black players' cognitive test scores with data that assumes their lower level of function. So this is part of this all came about as part of a payout process in the $1 billion plus settlement in a class action concussion litigation against the league. So in 2017, for those of us that don't remember, the NFL paid out more than $800 million to more than 1,000 former players that were diagnosed with dementia, Alzheimer's, and any brain-related disease that were related to due to concussion. So this is when the CTE and all this information started to come out, and so once the NFL could no longer dispute that playing football and getting these concussion was leading to all of these adverse neurological conditions that a lot of these former players were experiencing after well into their retirement. They had this large payout. So where race norming comes into play is that they were using race as a rough proxy for other factors that could affect the results in learning memory. So, like, such as looking at their socioeconomic background or looking at their education. So, what took place is that during the concussion payouts, what the NFL was doing, they were using, they had former black players that actually that were stating and filed suit saying that, well, you know what, they were using these race norming to prevent them from getting payouts. So you would have a player that would have the diagnosis of dementia, and then the NFL appealed some of these diagnoses from an outside physician and demanded that these test scores of some of these black players get curved using the race normed data. And then that would result in the reversal of the diagnosis. So that's something to think about, right? So think about, you're a retired player. You've experienced concussions. You're starting to experience some of these symptoms. And so the NFL says, all right, we're gonna pay out this money to these retired players. So you get the
Mhm.
diagnosis from your physician or from your neurologist or such. You get the diagnosis of dementia, Alzheimer's, or what have you. And then the NFL comes in and says, whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's take a look at this data. You know what? According to, this normative data that we have, because you're black, it doesn't appear that you would have qualified for this anyway, because of your data states that you're already below the grade where, you're not experiencing any defects due to the concussions. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, that was just mind blowing to me that this was even being utilized. What would your takeaway from this?
I mean, listen, we knew it before, but it's plain now, right? The NFL does not care about the physical or mental well-being of their players, right? They don't care. It was obvious with CTE, right? They denied it for a decade after every person with two brain cells knew that it was an issue, right? It's documented that they have put tens of millions of dollars into studies that say the opposite of CTE to mislead the public, right? Paid scientists, the whole deal, allegedly, because I don't want them to sue me, allegedly.
Allegedly.
We saw them ban kneeling, right, until they were publicly shamed and until George Floyd was murdered on camera. The reason why this is important, they're curving people's scores, right? And it may seem like a simple thing, but people have to understand when it comes to neuropsychology, this is very important because they're using the scores to determine cognitive impairment, which directly determines the amount of money and the type of care that people get. So with this individual, he was diagnosed by an outside doctor with dementia. The NFL took him to court and this was reversed, right? We all know what dementia does to people, right? 70% of the players in the NFL are Black, right? So we don't know how many people have been suffering for the last couple of decades, right? Because of this racist policy. The fact that they utilize these policies and that they're individuals with our same degrees and level of education, right, who will use this in reports, right, makes me ashamed to be a part of the fraternity that I'm a part of. I'm gonna be very honest with you, right? And they got caught, right? But this is another example of structural racism within the medical community, right? And again, it's another example of how Black life is cheap in America, and a devaluation of Black bodies. I'm gonna continue to say it. The devaluation of Black bodies. First of all, they gave them $1 billion, which was peanuts, right? They gave them $1 billion. Dallas Cowboys are worth $5 billion
I was gonna say,
on their own.
We all know how much money each organization is worth.
Right. They gave
Alone.
them $1 billion, and then it's under false pretenses, right? Because you gave them $1 billion, and then you're trying to cheat them out of their fair share of that. Black life is cheap in America, right? And again, the NFL is one of the biggest examples. And again, the fact that this was not on SportsCenter, right? ESPN, the leading story, they weren't talking about this all day long. It just leads me back to my whole point. Black life is cheap in America. You understand what I'm saying? And if you think I'm bugging, if you think I'm going too far, think about how much time they spent on the air talking about the amount of air that was in the Patriots footballs. Think about how much time we spent talking about that, right?
On every day.
Deflated footballs. We spent hours and days. They wrote stories. Bro, I had to find this story. Black life is cheap in America, even if you're a multimillionaire athlete.
Well, it was interesting.
And then the NFL.
It was interesting on what they did because they provided a very they provided a very positive smokescreen because they put it out and said, hey, you know what, we're gonna distribute $1 billion to former players, which sounds like a lot.
Right.
Okay. So we're gonna give out $1 billion and we're gonna distribute that to all the players because again, after they originally tried to deny any type of association with CTE, with dementia, with a lot of these players committing suicide, right? So once they couldn't fight that battle again, it's like, okay, let's throw a giant number out there. Let's throw a giant figure that when people see 1 billion, they're going to be, okay, the NFL is getting this one right. Okay. So after that, people go away, right? The media, all these other different people, that goes away because you're thinking that things are being taken care of on the home front. Not knowing here, you have these back channeling and you have all of these 70% you mentioned, right? 70%
Right.
of former NFL players are black. Okay. So that means how many people is that? I mean, think about it. We're looking at it on the individual level because you see 70%, but how many people did they literally, and we don't know, but I imagine it's a huge number that they actually reverse them and say, hey, you know what? No, you're not going to be able to, you know, get this money that's going to be able to give you the services and benefits that you can use to be able to financially afford, your health. Right? You're not going to be able to help yourself, or your family's not going to be able to afford to support you in these health needs after you played this game and you put your life on the line. So we're this number is okay, right? We got this $1 billion, but that's not for you. And we're gonna actually have
Right.
people come in and reverse that. And like you said, it's absolutely it's you know, it is a form of shame that you feel that you had other people that get this training, right? Because we took an oath, right? We have all these other different things as a clinician to be unbiased and so on and so forth. We could go down the whole list of the ethics that this is violating in our field. But it's a situation of how many people were actually affected that had to fight just to get funds and resources so they can take care of their health. That's after, and this is
Right.
after the diagnosis. It's not like they're getting this, preventative care. No, this is after they had to get the diagnosis first. It's not like they're giving it to all players and say, hey, you know what? You played in the NFL, so it's probably more than likely you've experienced a concussion somewhere along the lines. I don't care what position you played. So we're going to give this to all former players. It's like, no, you have to get a diagnosis first. So you have to be diagnosed with the neurological, with the
Right.
neurocognitive, diagnosis, which is dementia, which could be from mild, severe, whatever the individual is, and then we'll give you the money. But if you're black, nah, whoa, 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 nah, we got this comparative data right here that says you don't qualify for this. Like, I mean, this is like on such an individual level. I can't imagine what one, family is going through just trying to get services, just trying to get funds that they're owed anyway for playing this game, but they
And
can't
think
because you
about
got
it.
the same, you got the same, and they always say fall on the shield, right? They always talk about that with the NFL, but this is how you treat your former players, like any individual. This is maddening.
All I would say is this: their statement is they're committed to eliminating race-based norms in programs in neuropsychology and race-based norms and programs and in the neuropsychology community. Like, listen, first of all, we all know that's some bullshit.
Yep.
Okay, they're not committed to any of that. And second, listen, this is despicable. And I don't blame people for coming away from this and thinking, if a multi-million dollar athlete that plays for the New York Giants can't get appropriate medical care, what about me? That's all I'm gonna say. So the damage that is done, when individuals look doctors and nurses in their face and say, hell no, I'm not taking that vaccine, whether or not it's a good decision or not, I understand why some people are taking that vaccine, or some people are not taking it, right? When people look me in my face and say, yo, I don't care what you say that my kid ain't taking that ADHD medication, or I don't accept that diagnosis, these last two articles, this is where it comes from, right? We have individuals who are in positions of power, who have taken a Hippocratic oath, or and this is what they do.
It is. It's
I don't. I
embarrassing.
again,
It is. It's
you know,
embarrassing for those that participated in our field that went along with this sham. So, I hope
well,
more
it's
things.
still it's still going on. So this is
Yeah,
a to be continued
yeah.
because
So this,
from
yeah.
what I got,
I
still
hope I
being
hope
used
that
in the
they
field.
continue to put them on blast. No, because they absolutely more articles, and I'm happy that you had some players that had the awareness, or their families, or however the process played out, that you had them willing to fight. Right, you had them willing to seek litigation because this is important. This is your health. This is your life. Right. So this is ongoing, and they need to continue to put the NFL on blast for these things because you know and I know that there's more of this taking place and so many other different factions and so many other different areas. This is just the tip of the iceberg, right?
Right.
So there are so many other different things that we don't know that's going on, to how these players are being treated and mishandled after they play. So
That's a
yeah,
fact.
absolutely, this is to be continuing, and I hope they uncover more and more things.
All right, so next article we got is from Wired.com. This was another interesting one. Hacker threatens to expose therapy notes and information from patients. So this story came out of Finland. It's a company called Vastemo. They're like one of the largest mental health, psychiatric, or service companies in the country. So basically, listen, there's been a lot of like ransomware attacks. We've heard about a big one that went on out west in the
Mhm.
United States recently. Um, so they got control over the system, got access to all the information, and they're threatening to release the notes. Right. So from what we see, the ransom that they're requesting is about $500,000 worth of Bitcoin. And they're also like, for lack of a better term, like shaking down individual patients, contacting them, asking them for $230 worth of Bitcoin within 24 hours, 590 worth within 2 days, or they're going to release their information. So obviously this has a big impact because people are very concerned about their medical record, even more concerned about mental health record being exposed. So what did you think when you heard about this in general? Like,
Yeah, initially, to be honest, I thought this was very strange, because you typically don't hear about, you hear about, of course, like identity theft. You hear about all, the leaks and different things, but you typically don't hear, at least I haven't, I can speak for myself, of information like medical information being used, right? Because that's essentially what they're doing. They're weaponizing people's medical information. Their medical, um and it just, I don't know, it was very strange in the sense of, um it's atypical of how, you're using someone's health records and say, hey, I'm going to expose it. And I get the sense that, depending on, the country, mental health is not as widely open or spoken about, as it is in the US, right? As it's becoming. So I thought, for an individual or an entity or a group, or what have you, to use this against individuals and to weaponize it, yeah, I think that's despicable. I think that's something, but it's, it's unusual. It's, I don't know, it was very off-putting that you would use someone who's getting treatment, you're going to use it to shake them down.
I mean, it's definitely off-putting, like, and they said a couple of times, they were like, even I guess with ransomware attacks, there's like a code of honor, I guess, and they don't usually
Yeah.
do like with hospitals in certain places, which I kind of understand, but then I don't, because it's like, when you start talking about criminals that got a code of honor, it's like, to me that goes left real fast. Because I don't really believe in that. I'm not saying
It's kind of like
everybody
an
bad, but you
oxymoron.
know what I mean. Like,
Like,
yeah, like
yeah.
if they're trying to get money, whether they get it from Safeway or the General Hospital across the street, I mean, I don't really think they care. But I was thinking more of just the impact of it on kind of like a grand scale, and how it just may make more people just a little bit more apprehensive about seeking services because that vulnerability,
Mhm.
and there's already so many barriers that people already have, right? So now you got to worry about, think about if you live in Finland right now, if you were already apprehensive about, oh, is my therapist going to like me, is therapy going to help me, now you got to think about identity theft above and beyond all that, and your information being on some message board that people could purchase. um so that's crazy. And then it just adds to conspiracy theories, right? Like, a lot of people already have crazy ideas about what we do, what goes on in therapy, what happens to your record and information. And for it to be out there, it just makes it worse, right? Because confidentiality is necessary for what we do to be successful. So I think that was kind of the biggest impact. I think people are going to think a lot about the confidentiality, and just like that's a big part of it. Like, you got people who are essentially, for lack of a better term, like they're emotionally exposed, right? They're emotionally naked, like, with your therapy notes out there. People will probably pay anything if they think that that won't be released, if they have the funds. So I just think it opens the floodgates where if this is profitable, you don't want this to start to become a trend, right? Because think about if they were targeting places that might have high profile clients, right? Um, starts getting a little, it could start getting a little crazy, if this starts to become the norm.
Yeah, it was because I believe that this, I guess this note processing or this entity house the majority of, I guess, therapy or mental health notes for this area.
Yeah,
So they had a significant amount of data and people's informations,
yeah,
and that I think that that compounds an individual that's already vulnerable to now you're making them, like you mentioned, apprehensive, and now they might just be, hey, you know what, I don't even want to deal with this, and now this affects, now you're going to have more people going untreated. Now you're going to have
right,
more individuals that are just saying, hey, I don't want anything to do with this, I don't want this information to get out. Like, you have to think about certain populations of people where you're talking about maybe the LGBTQ community, or you're thinking about all these other different, vulnerable populations. And if that information gets out, that could be disastrous. It can make their mental health even more severe or even more worse, some of their symptoms, right? You could have people that
right.
are contemplating, suicide because they don't want certain information to get out. Again, it really depends on the place, and a lot of, countries, I don't know what it's like. It's Finland, right? Is that what it was?
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know
Finland, yeah,
I don't know what the temperature is as far as their culture surrounding mental health. In
right,
US, it's maybe it might not be seen as severe depending on what's being documented, but you have, it's more talked about. But in some of these other different areas, it's not. It's still very much taboo, and that could cause a great deal of distress for any individual that maybe their family doesn't know that they're in therapy, or they're dealing with trauma, right? They're dealing with all these other different aspects, and that could have a serious impact on that person's, mental well-being, that they may do something drastic. What if they can't pay,
right.
right? What if they're
It's a
not
fact.
able to afford, the ransom, and then it gets posted out, and then what this person has divulged, turns in. And then also the other side of it is, what if you have individuals whose information is divulged and that gets out there, and now they're suing, the therapist, or they're suing, the hospital, for maybe for now, what,
Right,
you didn't protect our information. What is your malware? Like, it could go and spiral out into a lot of different directions. And at the end of the day, the person is left exposed, and you don't know how that individual is going to react. You don't know how they're going to cope with information being possibly leaked. I mean, that's a very scary position to go in, or to be in. So, like I said, this is atypical, but of something that I've never heard happening. However, you don't want this to become a trend, like you mentioned.
yeah, that's a fact, man. I mean, we'll see how it unfolds, but again, you definitely just got to feel for the patients, and kind of the people that work there, right? Because I'm sure even people that, I'm sure they don't know everybody whose information was released, and I'm sure every patient that goes there is aware, of what happened. So if you think about the type of questions they're probably getting about confidentiality that they probably can't fully answer, it's just a bad situation for everybody, right? But it's something for us to consider, especially service providers, in terms of like what you do in terms of protecting their information, right? So
Absolutely. That could create a lot of different things. It can create a lot of distrust between client and clinician, client and the system. It could affect a lot of different areas. So, we'll see.
yeah.
All right. So, moving on to a lighter note, more positive note, Taraji P Henson. All right. So, she recently launched a campaign to help Black students fight mental health struggles and racism. So she created, it's called the Unspoken Curriculum. So it's a mental health campaign that helps Black students recognize signs of trauma and empowers them to seek help. It's a 6-week program running from May 17th to June 21st. And what it does is that it includes discussions with mental health experts and virtual hangout spaces moderated by therapists and by educators, where students can speak openly about mental health and their experiences. Taraji was a substitute teacher before she blew up on the big screen, and she recognizes that a lot of kids are coming from traumatic home situations and neighborhoods. So she's using her experience to and she's been very vocal about mental health, her personal experiences, and her journey and just mental health overall and mental health awareness. So yeah, I this is I would like reading through this article and learning more and more about this her curriculum and endeavor. What would you take away with this?
I think this is a good thing. I think it's another example of somebody who, like, same way we were talking about Carmelo Anthony, somebody putting their money where their mouth is, and not only that, she's not a passive participant, right?
Mhm.
You can tell by how she was talking about it. She said this was motivated by the pandemic and like police brutality, racial injustice, all of those things. What I was liked is that, like, she was talking about her experiences as a substitute teacher, and how, how she worked with like predominantly black boys, and she was just talking about from her perspective, her opinion. I guess they were in like a special ed class,
Mhm.
and she was talking about how a lot of them came from traumatic backgrounds, and she felt, like, not saying she didn't specifically say they were misclassified, but I think she was kind of making a point of trauma background, behavioral problems, and a lot of these children end up in this special ed kind of environment, right?
Yeah.
Um, and again, nobody doesn't have to try to take her head off, because she didn't say they were misdiagnosed or anything like that. But I think she had a valid point, because what it brought my mind to start thinking about was trauma, right? And some of these common diagnoses that we see, like ADHD, which is usually tied with oppositional defiant disorder, and how when we look at traumatized boys specifically, a lot of those symptoms can, it's like the hyperactivity, the defiance, a lot of those symptoms can overlap, right?
Right.
So it could be very easy for us as mental health professionals to walk into a situation, you know, and again, not saying that every child is misdiagnosed, but walk into one situation and, you know, people are looking at it in one perspective, and for us to start looking at it as at another once we get more background information. And I think she was saying that because the relationship she had with these kids, she was getting the background information, right? They were talking to her about their traumatic home life, and things they were getting into outside of school. So she was kind of making those connections. So I think that's very important. And again, that's something that we've been kind of doing on the inside too,
Mhm.
and again, it's a very big problem when you talk about children of color, um, and having people in schools and different places differentiate difficult behaviors and trauma, okay, from hyperactivity, specifically when we start talking about ADHD and behaviors that rise to the level of oppositional defiant disorder. A lot of the times this stuff gets mucked up together. So I appreciate what she's doing. I think it's going to be a good resource, and I think it's needed. You know.
Yeah, I loved every minute reading this. What I appreciated most, or what stood out for me, was the safe space that she was providing with kids. And as you know, when kids come to school, if they bond with a teacher, a lot of information is going to come out.
Right.
Right? They're going to talk about what's going on in the neighborhood. They're going to talk about what's happening at home. The teachers are going to overhear the conversations, right? We have to call what I appreciate, and I don't think people, what they underestimate with teachers is that they're with the kids more than the parents are,
Right.
right? The teachers are with your kids 8 to 9 hours out of the day. So, they're the ones developing rapport. Parents are pretty much reinforcing whatever's going on in the classroom. And depending on the age, a lot of teachers or a lot of kids develop really decent relationships with these teachers and they open up to them. So I'm happy
Right.
that she's using this opportunity. She's using, her platform to say, hey, you know what? Here's a space, right? Here's a 6 week program where we're going to educate them about mental health, giving them the opportunity to talk about these things, right? Giving them a space to do that. And you're going to bring in experts, you're going to bring in therapists, you're going to bring in educators. So not only are the kids able to talk about their experiences, now they're able to talk to someone who specializes in and say, hey, this is what you're dealing with. This is what you're feeling. This is what it is, right? So now they can make sense of it, because it's difficult for any kid, I don't care what age, they can be experiencing an intense emotion or they're experiencing circumstances. And if they're not informed of what it is, they're going to make of it maybe whatever their friends or whatever their group is telling, right? So I'm happy that she's creating this area and this space for her to be able to allow these kids to have an opportunity to talk about what's going on. And I love the fact, like we talked about it last week, is that you need a face, right? We need more faces to promote mental health. I mean, unfortunately, it shouldn't have to be that way where you need a face for things to
Right.
gain momentum and to gain traction, but you do. This is with any health condition, is that you need faces. You need people of a certain stature, of a certain celebrity, to come out and say, hey, I've experienced this, personally, and I want to, get more information. I want to get help. So now other people are able to say, hey, you know what? Yeah, you know what? This, I'm experiencing that too. So then, it starts to grow and get more information. You get more funding. You get more research. All these other different things. So I'm completely with this initiative in this campaign, and I'm loving it. I'm happy that more celebrities and more individuals are promoting initiatives like this.
I mean, listen, man, I think it's a fact. I think it's important that, what you said, like in terms of faces, that's an important part. And she's an important person. So for her to kind of pick up the ball on this one and run, you got to give her, credit, because she didn't have to do that, right? This is probably 1,000 charities, different things that she could put her time towards. And I think what we got to remember is, some of the benefits in terms of, you know, um, some of the things we talked about before, right? These children, they may be at the end of it, they may be young, but when we talk about intergenerational trauma,
Mhm.
like they're still experiencing it, right? When they're developing their identity and learning about things that have gone on in the past, and why they're in the situations that they're in, right? So, some of the benefits of this, is to insulate them, from some of those feelings of shame or guilt that can come if you're misinformed about why you're feeling the way you feel. You know what
Sure.
I mean? Um, and with a lot of this information, like a lot of people don't understand that coping, when we talk about coping, without empowerment, a lot of times coping is just learned helplessness. You know what I mean? You could teach somebody how to survive, you know, um, in a storm, right? But if you don't empower them, right, um, then you may leave them in a worse place, than where you started, right? So we want to bring in, and of course, there are extremes to everything I'm talking about. But the point is, we want to couple those two things, right? We don't want to treat people. We don't want to just teach people how to manage their feelings of anxiety without giving them, strategies to directly act upon the stressor that gave them the anxiety, right? We want to empower them. So I think putting things in places like this to give them the information, right, um, sets them up to be empowered. So, I'm
Absolutely.
definitely happy.
I like the modeling aspect of it, right? So like you see someone like Taraji, who's, I don't know her personally, but she's very down to earth, right? She seems like, the way she posts, the roles that she takes, and I mean, she's a very gifted actress. But I'm happy that she's reaching back into her roots, right? She's reaching back to her childhood, or not her childhood, but when she was teaching and helping people. And she's modeling this behavior by having experts and other folks come in, like you said, and it brings another level, like you mentioned, to the empowerment of saying, hey, you know what? It's okay to feel this way. Because it also normalizes and say, hey, what you're going through, yeah, you have every right to feel, and the way that you do. And this is how we're going to get through it together, because it also brings a sense of community. When you create this safe space, when you have all of these other different individuals, where you have students, where you have all these other different experts and therapists and people coming through, now you're bringing a sense of community where you're making it okay, right? You're normalizing and say, all right, this is what we're experiencing. Hey, I got you. Like you said, you're linking it and you're having these folks, and now you're creating a great environment for people to be able to, it's okay for me to speak up. It's okay for me to get these, the services. If we get to them while they're young and say, hey, going to therapy is okay,
Right.
Imagine what that can do. Like you said, that's where we be able to we're able to change that intergenerational trauma, because no longer is it getting passed on with untreated. Now it's like, hey,
Right.
it's okay to talk to a therapist. It's okay to talk to a professional. It's okay to have these other different roles and have these other different support. So I'm loving all of this, man. So I'm hoping that more endeavors and initiatives like this continue to grow and pop up, because this is great, and it's so beneficial and needed in our community. So I'm loving it.
Yeah, I agree, man. I just hats off to her. I don't really have anything else to add to that, man. But hats off to her. This is end on a good note.
Absolutely. So if there isn't anything else, we'll wrap things up. You got anything else, Dr. J, before we roll out of here?
No, we just want to thank everybody for listening, subscribing. Please continue to send the questions, video questions, and questions through the email. Right now, we're just working out some, glitches in terms of how to get them on the show the best way. But continue to send them to the Black Psychologist Podcast at gmail.com.
Yes, sir.
And again, we want to thank everybody for listening. Definitely humbled by the support and thankful. That's it for
Absolutely.
me.
All right. I couldn't say it any better than that. So everybody, appreciate it. Have a great weekend. Stay safe out there. Even though we're not in May anymore, it's always Mental Health Awareness Month. All right. And I wish everybody out there good mental health. Dr. J, always a pleasure, sir.
All right, my brother. I'm gonna talk to you soon.
All right, bro.
All right.